Saucers, Spooks, and Kooks. UFOs are serious business.
Welcome to all of you listeners out in Cyberland. My name is Christopher Graybill, and this is where I get to introduce the show and pretend to be Art Bell. It is great to be here, and I'm really excited to get into the second part of our Tal expose. We cover a sexual relationship with a lizard guy, alien wildlife in the deserts of Nevada, and we're going to pick right up with underground beasties. It's going to be quite the fascinating show.
Tal, as revealed in our breakfast, was a fan of the stories of Richard Shaver and the Shaver Mysteries, and I don't know if you know who Shaver is, all of our listeners out there, but our friend Aaron Gullius from the popular podcast The Saucer Life will give you a brief intro.
Richard Shaver is an interesting figure in the story of the whole notion of strange things and strange creatures existing underground. Back in the late 1940s, he writes into Amazing Stories magazine, which was a science fiction and fantasy fiction magazine, and tells a story. I think the first one was called I Remember Lemuria. And he claimed to have heard these strange sounds and these voices coming to him. And he learns the story of the Darrows and the Terros. The Darrows are little evil bad guys. The Terros are good guys. They live below the ground, and they have for since beyond prehistory and antiquity. And these Darrows, these evil little creatures from underground, will still torment people. And Richard Shaver claimed they tormented him. And these stories became incredibly popular in Amazing Stories magazine. They spun off their own special issues with nothing but Shaver stories with the Darrow, and it's difficult to know the degree to which Shaver believed all this and which of his words in the stories were really his and which were the words of Ray Palmer, who was an editor at Amazing Stories and would go on to be a seminal figure in early UFO publishing in the 40s and 50s and into the 1970s, I believe. But Richard Shaver's stuff predated the UFO era by a bit, but it would feed into it. And the underground dwellings of the Darrow and Terro and their technology would tie in to flying saucer culture. It would be a sort of explanation for some of the things people see, and it would persist. And other people would say that they had their own encounters with the Darrow and Terro, including some people who, one person in particular, who would sort of be on the fringes of the UFO and conspiracy scene for a long time. A fellow named Fred Chrisman, who said that he encountered the Darrow fighting them in a cave on an island during World War II. So not a massive direct link between the Shaver mystery, Hollow Earth, Darrow and Terro material and later Tales of Underground Bases, but you do have some overlap, particularly between the small, evil Darrow creatures and the evil, small Greys inhabiting these underground bases. Both are sort of races of creatures that are bent on tormenting humanity.
When he was in his early 20s, Tal hooked up with a gal named Mary Story, who later went by the name of Mary Martin, who was about 10 years older than Tal and was a fellow Inner Earth investigator. They married in 1973, and put out a zine in the 70s and early 80s called The Hollow Earth Hassle. In 2008, Tim Beckley put out a collection of the best of the Hollow Earth Hassle. I've never really gotten a hold of any of the original copies of the zine, so I'd love to see some of those original artifacts out there if anybody has copies they can share with us. But I'm holding now in my very hands the best of the Hollow Earth Hassle, and there's a couple articles by Tal in here. One was Our Paradise Inside the Hollow of the Earth, and another article from February 1982 edition of the Hollow Earth Hassle entitled Astral Inner Earth Kingdoms Are Engaged in Conflict Over Us. Talks about in this article the serpents of wisdom and higher awareness are ethereal teachers, and that some serpents dare to incarnate in the mortal form to teach, even to this day. It also talks about in this article underground UFO bases and way stations in the United States, which is kind of interesting. Tal was writing about that in 1982. That was pretty early on as far as the underground base mythos goes. It was 81 or 82 that Paul Benowitz first started talking about that in his Project Beta report about an underground base in Dulce, and there had been some type of conflict there between the U.S. government and the aliens, who they had some sort of treaty for this at secret base. But so anyway, yeah, this was pretty early on. I'll read briefly from this article. Tal wrote, alien beings have established bases in selective areas around the globe. In central Texas's Robertson County, UFOs have virtually become nightly callers, along with related ground-level phenomena, including unexplained tracks on the ground, mysterious deaths and disappearances of livestock, the interference of normal radio reception, strange code being received on citizens' band radio, power blackouts, etc. Later on in the article, he says, Southern California as well has UFO, Sasquatch incidents, and strange underground occurrences. One of the most significant took place in April 1973 when 3 students camped in the San Gabriel Mountains on the western edge of the Great Mojave, and they felt uneasy and suddenly saw a gigantic man-like figure that frightened the campers. The next day, 3-toed footprints measuring 18 inches long were found in the hard-packed soil of the area. The UFO Research Institute, uses an acronym UFORI, in Redondo Beach, California, was called in for scientific evaluation. Breaking in here, Tal names this UFO Research Institute in Redondo Beach, and that's where Tal lived at the time, so I'm kind of assuming this was his own little UFO Research Institute that might have been him and Mary and who knows what else. But he goes on to write, after extensive field work in the campground area, UFORI discovered the sound of geared machinery and what might be compared to hydroelectric plant noise coming from beneath the forest floor. Beyond normal hearing range, the subterranean sounds were picked up by special microphones placed directly on the ground. That's just an excerpt from this story, but you can see Tal was writing about this stuff, about underground bases, and also, that sounded, material sounds also like the Shaver mysteries, which also influenced him. So, yeah, pretty early on, he was into the UFO underground base mythos. And
was just going to say is that Tal Levesque, it's very possible that he had already met Benowitz by at least like 79, right?
Yeah, Tal told me that he was at that there was a kind of groundbreaking cattle mutilation conference in Albuquerque, and I believe it was 1979 that Paul Benowitz went to, and also David Perkins was there, as well as Gabe Valdez. And Tal said he attended that, and can assume if he did, he met Paul Benowitz during that period. Tal told me later, he knew Benowitz in the late 70s, early 80s, that he had lived in Albuquerque at the same time as Benowitz.
Yeah, I didn't want to derail you. I just
Mhm.
thought that was interesting info.
Yeah. Well, it factors into the story for sure, which we'll get into more as we move along in this episode or down the road somewhere. So, Tal and his wife, Mary Martin, became friends with Richard Shaver and traveled out to Arkansas to hang with him, and also appeared on the radio with Shaver on at least one occasion with Hilly Rose, if you're familiar with that name. Hilly Rose, at some point, he guest host on Coast to Coast AM now and then, but back in the day had a radio show on KFI AM in Los Angeles called The K-Files that dealt with paranormal subject matter, and had on the show Richard Shaver and Tal Levesque and Mary Martin, and we'll play a clip from that right now.
Hi, you're on the air, KFI. Good morning.
Yes, I'd like to ask the guest a question. This is such an exciting program. I've been interested in this theory ever since I heard about Admiral Byrd's expedition. And I wondered if you had thought of anyone, a private party forming, if anyone had thought of the idea of forming an expedition. Has this ever been thought of or done, do you know?
Yes, there has been an expedition that went up to Alaska, and they were turned back.
By whom?
I think it was Morley or something on that order. I have the name at home.
How long ago was this?
This was in the 60s.
Oh, I didn't hear about that.
Right, they were turned back, and it was all government land up at the north part of Alaska, and they were not permitted to go any farther.
Oh, how far were they allowed to go?
I think they went up to Circle, Alaska.
Oh,
and,
did they give reasons why they couldn't go any farther?
It was restricted land, government land, and they could not enter. It was fenced off. And then later on, this man that claimed he knew that the entrance was up there completely disappeared.
It might be noteworthy here to state that President Grant authorized the funding of an expedition by a boat and the fleet of the United States Navy to look and to find the polar opening and to sail into it. And this was funded by our government, and the boat was on its way up, and President Grant was on his way out, and it wasn't funded to completion.
Oh, that's too bad. I just wondered because I'm so interested in, if I could raise enough money, I'd like to start something like that myself, because it's a very plausible theory, really,
We'd like to do it also. This is eventually what we hope our readers will do as the newsletter goes along. We'd like to do some cavern exploration.
Oh, that would be marvelous. Did you mention a newsletter that was coming out or something that we could that could be available to us?
Yes, we do put out a newsletter once a month, and it's the Hollow Hassle.
Why, being asked is, why hassle? Why does that word fit here? Hollow hassle.
It's a hassle getting any news to prove this theory, Hilly. And we hassle it back and forth, the pros and cons of what is true and what isn't true, and this is why we called it a hassle. It's the hassle about the hollow earth.
So, I think Tal and Mary separated at some point, but it's not clear if they ever actually divorced, and I know they remained friends until Mary's death, which I think she died about 10 years ago or so. Tal claimed to have all sorts of famous or that he knew all types of famous or infamous people, like I mentioned Shaver, but Charles Manson, for instance, he claimed that he met Manson in Southern California at some party, and Tal claimed to have witnessed all manner of amazing things during his life, like, the reptilian guy he talked about when I had breakfast with him, and I was never really quite sure how much I believed him about anything, really, but, of course, claiming to see a reptilian creature from the inner earth who sent a thought bubble into his mind, how do you prove or disprove something like that? But, for instance, he was, as I mentioned, friends with Richard Shaver, and I don't know if the thing about Dan Aykroyd and Mariposa that he told me during our breakfast was true or partly true, but Tal was indeed good friends with Dan Aykroyd's brother, Peter Aykroyd. According to other people I know, saw them together on multiple occasions. We attempted to interview Aykroyd for the film, but were not successful, so perhaps we'll never know. But Dan, if you're out there listening, we'd love to have you on the show. So anyway, it was all of his experiences and influences which eventually led to Tal's involvement in the Dulce base story and what became known as the Dulce Papers. And here's Norio Hayakawa discussing that.
Nippon Television interviewed this strange person who called himself Jason Bishop III, but actually he had various other names. And Jason Bishop, his real name was Tal Levesque, and that was a strange name. And Tal Levesque was the one who contacted me back in 1988, and he told me about John Lear. And John Lear was the person who actually started circulating the Area 51 and Dulce story at the same time in one hypothesis. That was very unusual. And John Lear knew about Dulce because he was in contact with a lady by the name of Ann West, I think, who went later on, identified herself as Cherry Hinkle. At that time in 1990, yes, I was very much into conspiracy theories, and somehow Tal Levesque came to our house and he was being interviewed and he didn't want his photo taken, and he talked about how all of these facilities, important facilities such as Area 51 and Edwards Air Force Base and Colorado Springs NORAD, and Dulce, New Mexico, Southern California's important facilities were all connected by underground tunnel system. Later on, I came to find out who Tal Levesque was, and he called himself Jason Bishop because his last name is French. Levesque in French means the bishop. And so he called himself Tal Levesque, and Tal Levesque was a real name. But many, many years later, I contacted his sister, and his sister told me that Tal had a problem. And Tal was an avid reader of the so-called Shaver Mysteries of 1950. And the Shaver Mysteries, it was a science fiction type of magazine, The main topic was the entities that lived underground. And, Tal's sister communicated with me that Tal had a problem and that his favorite was reading the Shaver Mysteries books that talk about underground civilizations. And so my conclusion is that, he got the information from reading the Shaver Mysteries. There are people in this world who seem to take interest in pretending to have a lot of sensitive information and that want to pose themselves as a government agent of some sort and trying to give you the impression that they are part of the government and that they're very important people. And in this line of research, you encounter a lot of these kind of people who pretend to be something that they may not be.
So that was Norio Hayakawa, and in that interview we had with him, he talked about Tal had a problem, and what he meant by a problem was a psychological problem. Norio had, at one point or another, had talked to Tal's sister, who told him that, once again, he had a problem, psychological, or he was delusional. And next we'll have David Perkins talking about Tal.
Tal is the star of Spooks and Kooks. Which is he? Let's see. But I had known, I visited with them in Santa Fe, actually, before the conference, and I believe the previous year. I think the connection was made from Tom Adams, who Tal Levesque had reached out to Adams for information on mutilations so he could make his map and put all the mutilations in there. Then Tom got a hold of me and said, hey, you ought to go check out Tal Levesque in Santa Fe. He's really digging deep on some stuff. I went, okay. So I did, and a couple times at least I visited with Tal here in Santa Fe. And he was great. He was full of information, upbeat, funny, witty, smart, observant, thought, well, this guy's a pretty interesting researcher. Then he starts pulling out all his, what I call it, shaver material, and starts going into this troglodyte routine about everything that's happening underground. Everything above ground is just kind of an illusion. It doesn't count. It's all happening underground. I went, okay. And then he showed me his photos of the tunnels that they were making out, he claimed, out of Los Alamos, heading in the direction of Dulce and elsewhere to all these giant underground facilities that were happening. At that time, I was like, gee, really? Wow. I mean, I thought he might be onto something. And he had quite a story, how he found all these documents in the trash at Motorola and places where he'd worked as a security guard. And we stayed in touch for a long time, actually. We stayed in touch till well into the 2000s. And he was sort of like Adams. He'd collect make these packets of information and maps and all kinds of stuff and send me these big packages. And I was kind of on his list, but he had a unique way of putting things together and tying a whole bunch of sightings and earthquake faults and Indian reservations and mutilations and sightings and entity sightings and mapping it all out sort of in a similar way that I did. So he was there and he was soaking it all in, he and Mary. Well, Tal came to be a major player in the Dulce story, as you document in infinite detail. So I sort of lost track of him there for a while, because this was when the Dulce Bay myth sort of took off.
And so Perkins talked about Tal sending all these information packets out to researchers, which contained, among other things, the so-called Dulce papers, which Tal created with a lady named Sherry Hinkle. And of course, John Lear was also involved in this, and some of the information, or misinformation have you, presented in the Dulce papers was inspired by the Benowitz affair, which we'll get into more in future episodes. But what Tal told me was that he used others to help him promote the information he was sending out. And so John Lear could be considered one of Tal's agents, perhaps, or proxies. He was a front person, which was kind of the same role that John Rhodes played, according to Tal. Tal had these different proxies, that helped him distribute information. Chris, you talked to John Rhodes at one point, and we tried to interview him for the film, but after that initial interview, he wasn't interested. Is that right?
Yeah, I had about a 2-hour phone call with John Rhodes I think he kind of wanted to vet me to see where I was with the underground base reptilian situation. So this phone call, I really can attest how you were bombarded with all of these conspiracy theories.
During my breakfast with Tal and John Rhodes, yeah.
Right. I mean, he was really letting me have it, and I was eating it up. Right after the phone call, I made a big list of notes that he was machine gunning at me. I'll just read through the list really fast.
Yeah.
Ann West is really Cherry Hinkle. Cherry knew Thomas Costello and Levesque. Costello leaked documents while working in security and went on the lam. John never met Costello, but was friends with Tal, and Tal went on ground missions and air missions to Mount Tipton to look for the Dulce materials. On the air mission to retrieve the Dulce materials, they took pictures. On the ground mission to retrieve Dulce materials, John got really bad worms. It's a very dangerous place with snakes and military testing. Cherry Hinkle is heavily medicated and an MK Ultra baby mixed up with some really bad black ops groups. According to Cherry, this black ops group can astral project to guard the president in the White House. Cherry's son was a super soldier who killed himself. Tal and John were disheartened by Cherry's behavior and lack of proof, the Dulce box, which we can explain later on.
Yeah.
Tal took her writings and then mixed them with real information and translated them into intelligible science-based stories. These turned into the Dulce papers. Tal distributed this material in 100 manila envelopes to sci-fi authors and researchers. The materials from this were embellished by other people and evolved into a lot of fiction and ingrained into pop culture. Once looking for the Dulce base or a base in the Grand Canyon, I couldn't understand what he was talking about. Cherry warned John not to go, but John didn't listen and went anyway with a guy named Tony. They were all met by men in black who threatened them. The men in black knew John's real name, which was He's the first to expose the reptoids. He met David Icke at the Luxor Hotel in Las Vegas, and David stole his work and made the reptilians evil, and Icke likes money. 70% of reptoid encounters are benevolent. Reptoids have been sensationalized and sexualized. The capital, once the farcical government is gone, will be Denver. Underground bases connect everything, and the reptoids and greys are in the inner earth. The U.S. went underground beginning in the early 1900s. It's illegal to go underground by yourself. Tal found a book in a dumpster at Rand and a meeting of elites to go underground, a boring machine that turns the walls into melted rock glass, and there's patents of this. Aliens are not disinfo. It's about genetic testing. The antennas at Dulce once belonged to a biotech company. One belongs to the military. Some researchers tried to ensnare John in an underage girl thing. A guy named Craig Seabury talked with John about going to Dulce 10 years ago, but it didn't work out because Tal got scared. Magnavox is a military magic program. After 9/11, Tal was really mad at John for a while, and John bought him a motorcycle so they could go on missions. Tal made bombs and planted bombs in his high school as a kid. It's on newspapers.com. Search Thomas Allen Levesque. Oh yeah, this is how I think we came to figure out the bombing that Tal did when he was 16.
Yeah, that's the first time I had ever heard about that, and I'd researched it, looked on newspaper.com, and couldn't find it for the longest time. Then eventually, somehow he turned it up. But yeah.
I'll continue here.
Yes.
It's almost finished. Tal's dad was a big shot security guy with some shady group or corporation. His dad would let him into restricted areas as a kid, and Tal saw completely lifelike holograms of a lady in 1963. John has a nasty black ops group monitoring him. John witnessed something that has him under surveillance. Toward the end of Tal's life, he confessed to John that he was mad at him all these years because he was assigned to handle John. He didn't want to do it because they were friends, and he wanted to retire, but they were hanging on to the high school bombing attempt and holding that over his head, so he couldn't retire, I guess, and so he was handling John, supposedly. 2020 was the year the elites started toward their fake new age. The reptoids are going to be portrayed as the bad guys, but they're really the good guys. It's like revelation out of the Bible. That's how we ended that phone call.
Well, there you have it. A lot to chew over in that, for sure.
So after that conversation, we scheduled an interview, and I got up about to San Francisco and had not heard from him, and was going to head into the mountains to do the interview, but just never heard from him since then. I think that was in 2022, or I believe that was around then.
Well, yeah. Who knows? After I met Mr. Rhodes during our breakfast with Tal, he began to suspect I was a CIA agent for some reason. So who knows? He might have started suspecting you were up to no good, Chris.
Yeah, it's possible.
Yeah, you can see that relationship they had. They were he was either a protege of sorts or a proxy, putting out a lot of the same information. And yeah, but part of it is that the reptiles or the reptilians are the good guys, more or less, which kind of contradicts some of the Dulce base material where the reptilians are portrayed as the bad guys. And you mentioned there's some names there, Cherry Hinkle, and involved in this nexus of people pushing out this Dulce base information, along with John Lear. And Cherry Hinkle's an interesting person. We won't get too deeply into her role in all of this right now, but she kind of first came on the scene, or the first thing I ever noticed concerning Cherry Hinkle had to do with an event that's been written about. I think it's in some old UFO reports, and you don't, the names of the person wasn't reported, but it was a woman who was abducted by some type of reptilians in the Nevada there, and it had to do with some mountain. Either the reptilians came out of the mountain and the woman was abducted, and she was either raped or the reptilian had sex with her. That's kind of Cherry Hinkle's initial background, and it kind of dovetails with another person that Tal worked with. One of his front people, so to speak, proxies, was a lady by the name of Pamela Stonebrook. During my breakfast with Tal, John Rhodes mentioned he was getting ready to go on Art Bell's show one night, and they were prior to the show, they were talking to each other, and he mentioned Pamela Stonebrook and her claims of having sex with reptilians. And as soon as Art heard about that, he went, "Oh my God, we got to have her on tonight." And they did, and we'll play a little clip of that. But
I would just like to say this is like classic Art Bell.
Yeah. And the way Tal phrased it, they had some type of falling out, or she had gone off script. Who knows?
It is great to be here. My guest is Pamela. Pamela had a sexual relationship with a lizard guy. And that's really unfair, because actually they are known as reptilians. Scales and all. And we'll get back to Pamela in a moment. Well, all right. Back now to Pamela. And I think we left off at the point, Pamela, where really, I mean, if you're really being honest, Pamela, you've got to admit that you did make a rather definitive statement that
All right, you can call me on that if you want.
that reptilian sex was better than human sex.
Well, I can only tell you that it was like something I had never, ever experienced. And it was very tantric. It was...
Very what?
Tantric. It was a skilled performance, let's say. And not only that, there was an emotional connection that I felt that was so profound.
So this was not just your basic...
No.
Okay, and when you talked to John Rhodes, your phone conversation, he also mentioned different people kind of co-opted their work.
Yeah.
And that's the same thing that they told me when I had breakfast with them. David Icke, for instance, co-opted the reptilians and turned them into bad guys, and they also pointed to other researchers that they shared information with. One was Richard Sauder, who wrote a book several years ago on underground bases and tunnel boring machines, and that book featured all these blueprints that came from Rand that showed these tunnel boring machines and mechanical operations. And Tal said, once again, all that information came from him. Those were blueprints and whatnot that he had discovered doing his work as a security guard back in the day. As for the Dulce papers, the hero of the story was a security guard named Thomas Costello, who worked allegedly for the government in the joint base at Dulce, New Mexico that was shared with these aliens. And as the story goes, Costello and some of his fellow workers found out about all the bad juju that was going on in different levels of Dulce base, where they're doing experimentations on humans and creating these alien-human hybrids, And all of this resulted in the so-called Dulce War. It was a shoot 'em out between the human security workers that were revolting against what was going on there. So there was this confrontation with the aliens, and all of Costello's colleagues were killed except him. And as the story goes, Costello made it out alive and smuggled out a bunch of surveillance videos and photos and top secret documents and such. And so all of this material ultimately led to the creation of the Dulce papers, which were released in 1988 or 89. And we'll talk more about that in future episodes, but long story short, my theory is that Thomas Costello was not a real person. Big surprise there, but was actually a composite character based on Tal Levesque and Paul Benowitz, and Tal helped create this mythos with these other players in the Dulce papers story, such as Cherry Hinkle and John Lear. And I lay out a number of reasons in my book for this theory of Thomas Costello being a composite character. And one interesting item I came across that seems to support this theory was from an old episode of the Billy Goodman Happening from the late 80s and early 90s, and an interview on the show with an alleged Area 51 security guard who went by the handle of Yellow Fruit. Just to set this up a little bit, we'll play a little clip of Yellow Fruit, but the Billy Goodman Happening was this radio show that really got rolling in late 88 to 89, and it was like where people first started hearing about all this stuff going on at Area 51, and among his guests at the time were Bob Lazar, who initially went by the name of Dennis, and he had been on, there'd been some television segments that George Knapp did, and Billy Goodman picked up on this and started interviewing a bunch of these characters connected with Area 51, including John Lear and others. And in fact, Billy Goodman started going out on trips. They'd take buses out to Area 51 and the Little Alien, and so that's kind of the background. And one of the characters who emerged in this story was this mysterious yellow fruit. Let's have a listen.
And now, yellow fruit is on the line. Gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, let's tell you about yellow fruit. Yellow fruit is up at Groom Lake. He's part of the organization up there that, well, let him tell you exactly what he is. Maybe he'll give us a little background. Okay, yellow fruit.
Hello.
Yes, sir, yellow fruit. Would you mind telling the audience exactly what your position is up at Groom Lake so we can clear that up?
Roving security, passive security, background investigations, recovery. I've been lerping over in Deep Springs for the last few days. Lerping is long-range patrol. Deep Springs is an EBE wildlife release point. The EBEs have been trying to introduce some of their wildlife into the Deep Springs area to see if they can survive on Earth and study them, which is part of what I'm doing, is trying to catch some of this wildlife so that we can examine them genetically and see how compatible they are with Earth wildlife. Also, a year and a half ago, maybe 2 years ago, the Soviets were allowed to install, against the wishes of the U.S. government and without the involvement of the U.S. government, the Soviets were allowed to install a device 300 feet below the surface of Deep Springs. So this is part of what's going on, part of what you might be looking for.
That's another trip. That's another trip down the line. Deep Springs might be our next trip, our next little sojourn.
Okay, and so yeah, you heard a clip there of Yellow Fruit, who I'm convinced now was Tal Levesque. I started listening to, I had a bunch of Billy Goodman happening tapes, and as I was writing the book, I'd already developed this theory that Tal kind of based Thomas Costello after himself, and I was just listening randomly to stuff, and here comes on this Yellow Fruit character, and I go, man, that sounds just like Tal. And I became convinced over time that it was Tal. It fit the model. It was a security guard at Area 51, and the yellow fruit started to show up in some of the literature about Area 51 that was put out by several people that were associated with Tal, like Branton. I later read in his materials, he talked about yellow fruit and a lot of the stuff Yellow Fruit would discuss when he appear on the Billy Goodman Happening now and then. There was a second clip after that, one of the Nippon TV UFO documentaries that dealt with Dulce and Area 51, where they interviewed none other than Tal Levesque.
A gentleman in New Mexico 荒廃実験は宇宙人と政府の協力のもとに行われているんです。実験の過程として作り出した奇妙な動物たち、例えば猫の頭にウサギの体をしたキャビット、もう実際にそういう動物がダルシーの近くでは発見されているのです。
You really can't hear his voice too well, but that's something you can compare to the Yellow Fruit clip, as well as the other clip we played earlier of Tal and Mary from the 1970s when they appeared with Hilly Rose.
Jules Verne wrote about it. Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Edgar Allan Poe.
Edgar Allan Poe wrote about it, and
well, these are all fiction writers, though.
Right, but take a look at Jules Verne, and you take a look at some of the other authors. The things which they stated in their fiction, this was science fiction, was based on science fact, and a lot of the things that Jules Verne has stated have come true almost like prophecy.
Now, in that same episode of the Billy Goodman happening we were listening to, where we played that snippet of Yellow Fruit, Bill Cooper also called into that show, and at some point I put together a Yellow Fruit mixtape from the Billy Goodman happening. We can, release some more of that material, but anyway, Cooper called into that show, and he was, talking to Yellow Fruit, and ostensibly, Yellow Fruit was confirming a lot of the stuff Bill Cooper was saying at the time. Yeah, once again, there's this secret treaty between the U.S. government and the aliens. They have these underground bases and whatnot, But one of the things that Tal told me was that he used to go hang out with Bill Cooper at his bunker in Arizona. And he would do this sometimes when Cooper would be a guest on the Billy Goodman happening. He recalled one time where they were hanging out there. They'd drink beer and chow down pizza, and Cooper was usually drinking the harder stuff when he was doing these Billy Goodman happening appearances. And one time Cooper got all pissed off, according to Tal, and he had a pet bird, a parakeet or something, who was making a lot of noise, and it pissed Cooper off, and he went over, grabbed the bird out of the cage, and broke its neck and killed it.
Oh, my God.
Tal sent me this anecdote in an email. As he often did, he said I should tell no one about this incident, and in bold red letters would write, "Delete this email after you read it," which was something he sometimes did when he's laying some heavy top secret info on me. But
that totally tracks with Bill Cooper.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It speaks to his violent nature and perhaps what led to his demise. And so, yeah, in this tape of Cooper and Yellow Fruit on the Billy Goodman happening, they act like they don't know each other. They're on different lines, but they're probably calling from Cooper's house. And, you can see how this was kind of orchestrated, this whole thing, or at least, that's my suspicions. Other people can draw their own conclusion. Yeah, as I stated, my working theory was that Tom Costello, was based on Tal. He helped create this mythos, once again based partly on himself. And during our email correspondences over the years, I'd go back and forth with him on this. I didn't suggest that he based it on himself, but I was running that by him. Was Costello a real guy, or was this just like a literary construct to, push the story? But he always stood by that claim that yes, Costello was the real deal, But eventually this all changed with an email I received from Tal, which Norio Hayakawa will now explain.
Thomas E. Costello never existed, admitted the late Tal Levesque, originator of the Dulce Base myths. Now, according to the author of a new, highly recommended, fascinating and thought-provoking book, Saucers, Spooks and Kooks, UFO Disinformation in the Age of Aquarius, Adam Gorightly stated that just a few months before finishing the first draft of his book, he was informed that Tal passed away on December 21st, 2018, quote, to his final resting place in the inner earth, where he'll no doubt be reunited with friends and lovers like Richard Shaver and Mary Martin. As it is above, so it is below, unquote. Now, Adam Gorightly continues, quote, during our multi-year correspondence, Tal repeatedly claimed that Thomas Costello was a real person and that the Dulce base material was authentic. Nonetheless, I continued to press him during our email exchanges, never directly calling him out on what I suspected his role was in the creation of the Dulce base mythos, but just asking the questions again and again in different ways until at last the dam broke and Tal shared the truth, or at least something close to that. The question I posed that elicited Tal's final email to me concerned an alleged interview of Thomas Edwin Costello that surfaced in the 1980s, an artifact which I always assumed originated with Tal. My question: when did this interview with Costello take place? I thought he was in hiding after 1989. Tal's email response was as follows, quote, "You still do not get it. Thomas Edwin Costello is a creation, a myth. I took rantings from a heavily drugged woman, Ann West, also known as Cherry Hinkle, made corrections to stuff that was really wrong, added my own real research, and mixed it together. That was the basis of the 2 original Dulce base articles. Literally, I made 100 large envelope packets with supporting material about underground bases, genetic research, hidden science, research and development, and so on, and sent the material to authors and lecturers who then mixed it into their talks, articles, and books. This made it look like it was coming from more than one source. My friend's father designed improvements on the tube shuttle system. He worked with Werner von Braun. I would go on vacations with them to Edwards Air Force Base. VIP stuff. My father worked for Magic. I worked in advanced project development, later as counterintelligence and as a security supervisor. I mixed stuff I was not supposed to make public into the Dulce myth. The goal was to manipulate ufology into another direction, away from the boring lights in the sky stuff, to affect the public imagination. So Norio Hayakawa was right. I was behind a mind game. When it caught on, I could not reveal what was true and what was not. I had to protect Cherry Hinkle was out of her mind and keep it going. Later, Cherry and I had a falling out when she went public on Facebook saying she was the secret source. But source of what? Have you ever read any of her porno Dulce revelations? The interview never happened. It was creative writing. I asked several people to submit questions for Thomas Edwin Costello, then sent them to Cherry, and this was done twice. She answered the question as if she was Thomas Edwin Costello. I do not think he ever existed, but I'm not going public with that opinion. Are you kidding? Look at how the Dulce myth has changed ufology and sci-fi, unquote. This is Norio Hayakawa of Rio Rancho, New Mexico, USA.
My last sighting of Tal Levesque, last time I ever saw him, I'm thinking it was probably around 2017 or so. He died in 2018, and this was at the Grocery Outlet Bargain Market.
Grocery Outlet Bargain Market.
And I noticed him. He was in the frozen section where the frozen box food was, and he was like pulling out packages, and he had a little eyeglass he stuck up to his eye, and I guess he was like reading the ingredients, what were in these different items, and that kind of tracks with Tal. He was health conscious. He probably wanted to know what additives and crap were in there. But anyway, he hadn't seen me, and I approached him and asked him how he was doing. And he was bit startled. I think he might have suspected I was surveilling him or something. We had a brief conversation, and that was the last time I ever saw Tal Levesque.
So when you made yourself present to him, like what did he do?
He was a little bit startled. Said, "Oh, how you doing, Go Riley? What are you doing here?" I'm just shopping at the grocery outlet bargain market. How you doing, bud?
I love that. No, it's just him getting surprised like that. It's just he's like in his own world.
Yeah.
It's telling. It seems like.
And so that was the last time. And he died in December of 2018, a day before his birthday. And I forget the exact date. Maybe it was December 21st, and it was announced by John Rhodes on his Facebook page at the time.
Let's finish out the episode with some Resistance Band.
Oh, cool.
Yeah. This song is about Thomas Costello, so it seems appropriate.
Can you expound a little bit on the song, who it's by, and?
Yeah. When I was researching, like B-roll and all of the different films for making the movie, I came across this band that was featured in some of Bill Cooper's. What are those called? They're called Red Light. Help me out here.
Well, yeah, I think Red Light was the production company, perhaps. It was friends of Cooper's. Is that right?
Yeah. So somehow the Resistance Band was really good friends with Bill Cooper. So Bill Cooper put these songs in to his documentaries that he was making back then about Area 51. So I finally came across this guy named Craig Seabree, who John Rhodes actually mentioned in his phone call to me.
Right.
And Craig was pretty good friends with Bill Cooper, and he was pretty much the guy behind the Resistance Band. And he was also really good friends with Tal Levesque, according to him. And he told me one story about Tal Levesque, and I'm just remembering this just now, is that he went to go hike with Tal on, maybe it was Tipton Mountain, and Tal had already gone up the mountain and Craig was running late. And so he followed Tal's tracks, supposedly, of the way he went up the mountain by the chocolate milk cartons that were left behind, that Tal was throwing behind as he was going up the mountain. So that was a pretty good story.
How many milk cartons?
He said he really loved chocolate milk, and you could tell because you could find his way up just by, all the cartons that he was seeing going up the mountain.
And Tal was littering too. Shame on him.
But so The Forgotten Man is the title of this song, and it's about Thomas Costello.
Yeah, I listened to that earlier. It's a pretty cool song.
The Resistance Band, they had such a great sound. I love all the vocals, and
yeah.
When I heard it on those Bill Cooper documentaries, I was just like, okay, we got to get this into film.
So many times before, top secret said the job description. Soon a man showed up at my front door. He said your clearance has been